Welcome to another episode of the AI Innovators Podcast. Today we have with us Aninda Saha, Senior AI Research Engineer at Leonardo, and which is now part of Canva. Aninda, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Prashanth. Great to be here.
Well, one of the first things that I wanted to ask is you did a PhD, and then right after your PhD, you joined Leonardo. Talk about dream first jobs, right? Like most people don't get to go straight from college or graduate school to a company that is just making waves all over the world. Leonardo's racked up millions of users, being acquired by Canva in record time. Talk to me a little bit about how that felt like.
No, 100%. It's been a wild journey for sure. I was involved in AI since 2018, back in my undergrad days, doing a couple of internships in medical imaging and so on. And, it really piqued my interest from that period. Then I kind of went on to do my PhD and I was really enjoying what I was learning, but feeling a little disheartened at kind of the AI landscape in Australia at the time because there weren't a lot of players, honestly. And so when Leonardo came up, pretty much at the tail end of my PhD, it just felt like a dream come true and kind of a match made in heaven. Honestly, at the start, they reached out to me and I was kind of doing a little research on what Leonardo was about. They were only 6 months old at the time, so nowhere near as renowned as they are now. So I was like, oh, they sound pretty interesting, very aligned with the work that I was doing in my PhD, and yeah, thought it was a great fit. But honestly, didn't know what I was getting into, what I was walking into. And eventually, within a month of joining, I basically became part of the founding research team at Leonardo. And essentially, we started building out our Phoenix model. And so from the ground up, and that was a very, very exciting experience and obviously led to a really great outcome with the Canva acquisition.
Brilliant outcome. And as far as acquisitions go, I can't think of two tools that are more suited together than Leonardo and Canva. But I just want to touch back on the journey of being a student and then joining a startup that is only 6 months old.
Yeah.
We've heard of plenty of stories where someone finishes a PhD and then they start their own company. But to take that leap of faith in an unknown startup right out of graduate school for your first gig, what was it about Leonardo? What was it about the founders? What was it about Leonardo that convinced you that, hey, this is a punt worth taking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a few earlier stints at kind of corporate kind of jobs and stuff like that, and a few research organizations. And during my PhD, I was also working part time at a startup as well. So part time, and I became the data science lead at that company. And honestly, I really enjoyed kind of that early stage kind of hustle and kind of, wearing all these different hats and kind of understanding the holistic picture of the product that you're building. So I really started to appreciate the startup environment from that time. And so when Leonardo came along, it felt comfortable, it felt familiar, right? Because I'd already done that. And like I said, it aligned so well with, with what I was doing in my PhD. It was at the early hockey stick curve of the Gen AI curve, if you will. So, still fairly early days. And so, yeah, honestly, it just felt like the right move. I had a few other corporate offers, but I was like, yeah, that's not happening. Leonardo's the one for me.
We're all glad that the story turned out this way because, yeah, you've got a crack team. And yeah, I've bet some of your team back in the early days as well when we were in San Francisco sometime in 2023 at an event.
Mm.
And right off the bat, the vision that they had and the kind of product vision that they were talking about, and also just the intellectual ability of the founders. That's what drew us in. Yeah, we also wanted to work together with Leonardo back at that time. So going back to your PhD, you did your PhD on reducing, and at least part of your work was on reducing complexity,
Mm.
computational complexity of computer vision models. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that work was and how that translates into what you're doing currently at Leonardo?
Yeah, 100%. So basically, my undergrad was in electrical and computer engineering. So I was doing a lot of work in electronics and I was really interested in kind of the bridge between hardware and software. And so when AI started, really scaling up, the big, obviously, go to trend was just scale up your compute. And I felt that that wasn't necessarily the only solution. I think it had to go hand in hand with, clever optimizations, algorithmic developments, and so on to kind of bring down those costs, both from a commercial point of view and as well as environmental impact and that kind of thing. So I was passionate from that perspective. So I guess I took on my PhD kind of feeling my way through it. And then I kind of settled on knowledge distillation as my research area. There's very clever people doing a lot of work in quantization methods and all kinds of, accelerated attention mechanisms and things like that. There's all kinds of really novel, and optimization is a hard problem, by the way, right? So I kind of tackled it from a perspective of, hey, what can an AI teach another AI? And that was what distillation is about effectively. And it was pretty
Mhm.
early for that research direction. So yeah, I was able to carve out a couple of publications myself.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So now this is a question that is a result of someone who's not a machine learning engineer or data scientist hosting a podcast with ML engineers and data scientists, which is when you talk about knowledge distillation, right? Like, so DeepSeek's come out now and everyone's talking about, how they did it and DeepSeek training on what OpenAI has already done. That's sort of similar when you talk about knowledge distillation.
That's 100% exactly what it is. And it has such like, I guess, a powerful ability. Essentially what it does, knowledge distillation, is it learns from the outputs of other models. And so what I suppose they would have done is, and I can't obviously theorize on what they actually did, but distillation, the way it works is you take the outputs off a model and then you feed it as the training objective for another smaller model potentially. And there are some heuristics of why that works better. So, for instance, a classic example is when you train a classifier model, right? You can say to the model, this is a dog or this is a cat or, whatever other class. That one hot encoding of it's definitely this, it's definitely not the others, is not as friendly for the model to learn from. But when you take a larger model that has already trained on those one hot encodings effectively, what you get is a balanced distribution, which basically can represent, I guess, you know, a more nuanced kind of classification distribution. So, like, if a cat looks kind of like a dog, you might get 50% probability of a cat and 40% of a dog. So you can pick up that nuance a bit more. And so teaching that to a smaller model allows it to learn better effectively and more effectively.
That sort of explanation is very helpful, at least for someone like me to understand what really went on behind the scenes. Now, one of the things that stood out on your LinkedIn when we first reached out was when you said AI power shouldn't be concentrated in the hands of a few. And obviously, with AI and democratization of AI is a huge, huge topic now. And I think that's sort of why the general public is so in favor of DeepSeek compared to OpenAI. We've all seen the Twitter memes and everything that have come out in favor of DeepSeek, right? And over here at Salad, we also believe the same thing, but we're doing that on the compute side, right? Like for us, AI power shouldn't be concentrated only in the hands of people with access to high-end GPUs, and that's why we're bringing data center GPUs as a compute platform. But democratization is a nice goal. Even in real-world democracies, we see a lot of imbalance and inequality, and we're starting to see that in the AI space as well. How do you ensure democratization of AI works?
Yeah, for sure. This is a topic I was kind of very interested in from when I started my PhD. And I think at the time, obviously, these large language models didn't exist. It wasn't as prevalent. But even so, I saw this trend towards like bigger and bigger and bigger models, which regular people can't access. I had a vision of like kind of ubiquitous computing, which is, basically you have AI built into your smart TV or smart lights and just across your manufacturing processes, logistics. And so, you know, when the LLMs sort of came around, I was initially a little hesitant of it going completely free reign into the wild as open source does. Part of the reason was like seeing the capabilities of these models, and I was a little concerned about it falling into the wrong hands and so on. But I realized over time, as these concentrations start to accumulate, it's actually more dangerous to have only a few people have access to these things. It will do so much more benefit in the hands of the masses by enabling them to also harness kind of this technology and this power. Yeah, I just don't see the concentration being a good thing. And so in terms of our offerings on our platform, we have API accesses, for instance, that allow anyone to kind of build onto our platform, around our platform, in third-party apps and so on. We try to bring down the costs of accessing generations quite significantly. We have distillation methods, distilled models that run on the platform. We recently launched Flow State, for instance. If you haven't checked that out, it's basically a way to stream through a whole bunch of generations, which basically uses a fairly efficient model to enable that. And what that does is, instead of users generating a whole bunch of rounds, you can basically just scroll through a bunch of generations which pop up in real time, and then decide which one you like, and then kind of hone in on that, find variations of that image, and then keep doing that until you get to a point that you're happy with. So yeah, that's enabled by essentially efficient distilled models, if you will.
Salad here is a Canva house.
Mhm.
We do as a one-man marketing team. I can't imagine the things that I do without having Canva, right? I kind of dabble with Leonardo as well.
Yeah.
And I am someone who uses text to image generation a lot on a day-to-day basis. And I think from the user's perspective, what you just mentioned, it's such a subtle change, but
Yeah.
just having to scroll through or getting to scroll through your images as they're being generated and
Yeah.
looking at the variations and going, you know what? Let me get more of those. That completely flipped the script in terms of as a user experience. Because before that, I remember from an end user having to, you get 4 or 8 images looking through and then just going through just
Mhm.
one by through batches of 4. And that was just incredibly frustrating as a workflow. Just also opens up your mind to, because your brain is thinking on the fly as it's looking at these images and things pop out that you weren't even thinking of before. So it's such a fine difference between just showing in batches of 4 and then just having a scrolling feed of images that you can just continue experimenting with. But it's a massive change in terms of end user experience.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, very simple kind of solution, very creative. And I think we're one of the first to roll out something like that, but it entirely kind of shifts how you basically interface with image generation models.
Exactly. Now Leonardo's grown quickly to be a leader in the field, right? I don't want to venture a guess as to how many billions of users you have. And I just know that in 2 years, everyone dreams of that hockey stick growth, and you have actually achieved it at Leonardo. But what do you think actually made Leonardo stand out in a sea of AI tools?
Yeah, for sure. I think, being an early entrant in the market was definitely an advantage. I think that we came out with probably one of the first web-based UI for image generation, and a pretty good one at that. I think that's what drew a lot of the kind of the novice users in, people that wanted to kind of experiment easily without having to, you know, go through multiple sort of steps and so on. So UX was initially an important part of what we did. And I think eventually, we have a really strong team. We have a very diverse team who kind of come from all walks of life, and they really bring together, they have a really good synergy in the way they kind of innovate. People from the community who have been just hacking together with open source tools, people with deep research experiences, with PhDs. Our One of our research co-founders, 21 years old, he got hired as the researcher. So, but just all incredibly intelligent, sort of smart people. And I guess on top of that, yeah, I guess we had a very strong focus in R&D pretty early on, which is when the Phoenix model was kind of born. But what motivated that was, like, we were seeing all these open source models at the time. It didn't have good prompt adherence. It didn't have good text rendering capabilities. And we were like, let's change that. Let's, take on the investment to fix that and build an in-house model. So, and that really paid off.
That's something that I've noticed with Phoenix as well, in that it is one of the better models out there. As an end user, it is oftentimes sort of a black box when because I dabble with a lot of AI tools, a lot of salads, advertising, our website. We use a lot of AI image generation.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we don't understand what's under the hood of
Mm.
all these models. But that's one of the things that immediately stands out when you're using Phoenix. Now, what were some of the unique approaches and techniques that your team employed, just to make sure that prompt adherence, text rendering, visual fidelity, all of those are really good compared to the other models? Was it a lot of research work involved, or is it more of a distillation where you take and then you apply some smart techniques to just improve upon what's existing?
No, not quite. We had a pretty small research team, pretty small lean budget at the time. So it was really phenomenal that, we got Phoenix to where it got, because what we really did was leveraging, standing on the shoulders of giants, kind of harnessing the entire literature landscape to understand what the problems were with with the current models at the time. And so yeah, we really just went layer by layer, kind of understanding what was happening with kind of the prompts to basically condition the image generation, right? And so yeah, we identified areas in certain models that didn't model the prompt correctly, and so on. So we really took a very kind of targeted approach in that sense. We um, you know, just basic research, really finding where the problems lie and figure out what existing solutions we can apply to help mitigate that.
And I'm curious about prompt adherence, for example, which is how do you even evaluate that? Because from the user perspective, when I'm typing in a prompt that says, for example, a cat in a dark gray room, dark gray is subjective, right? What sort of dark gray I'm looking for is subjective, unless I'm actually going there and inserting color codes in there. So from a user side, it looks like prompt adherence is a massive ocean. And there is no one way to say, hey, this is the prompt that the user is looking for. How do you evaluate that from the research side?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of multimodal models now that understand both text and images. So what you can do is effectively effectively use those models to basically evaluate a score that tells you how aligned the prompt and the images are effectively. So, and there's a whole sea of those kinds of models.
And then in terms of data sets, when you're curating massive data sets for Phoenix, and I think you mentioned somewhere that you did across distributed computing environments. Can you give a little bit of background on were there any interesting hurdles that you faced, or is this sort of approach standard within the industry?
I think it's mostly standard approaches that we took on the data front. We have a lot of captioning kind of jobs that you have to kind of synthetically use, captioning models to basically say what's in the image, because a lot of data sets won't have, I guess, sufficiently descriptive prompts to describe what's in the image. So what you do is use captioning models to synthetically generate a better, more verbose caption, so on. So, and that's pretty standard practice across the industry. But there's a lot of challenges, engineering challenges around distributing inference for that kind of captioning jobs. And there's a lot of, pretty standard parallelization kind of techniques of your model. So when you're training a really large model, you'll need to sometimes split it up across different GPUs, you split up the data, and so on and so forth. So because we built that infrastructure from the ground up from October 23, yeah, I think it took a couple of months and then we were pretty much up and running.
Got it. Now, you mentioned one of my favorite words, inference, which obviously means that I have to ask you as a researcher about the salad model for inference compared to others. What are your thoughts on just a distributed compute platform like Salad and our vision of just bringing home PCs and consumer GPUs to run inference?
I think it's a brilliant idea. I had been thinking about, what if someone were to do that, and you guys were doing that. So I think there's so much idle GPU capacity around the world. If you can leverage that to make AI more accessible to the masses effectively for quite cheap, that's, I think, fantastic. I think there's obviously a difference between inference and training. So, but for inference workloads, I think it totally makes sense.
That's most of what our workloads are. Companies running production use cases inference.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the big news, which is Leonardo integrating with Canva. This is something that I think set off a tremendous amount of excitement within the community. Users like myself were really, really thrilled to see this partnership come through. Now, this year, I'm looking for the ideal workflow, right? Like Canva users, everyday folks working within templates. what are the features from Leonardo that they get to benefit the most from? And then as Leonardo users, what are the features from Canva that they get to benefit the most from?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess, from early days of Leo, I was eyeing Canva as like, hey, we should partner with them. And then they ended up buying us. So, the reason I felt that was there is just so much synergy between the two platforms. We are an independent AI image generation platform. They are all in one visual communication platform, right? They have integrated AI capabilities through Magic Studio and so on. So whenever you're in a kind of design, you've got all your AI tools kind of accessible within that system. And they also launched Dreamlab, by the way, recently, which is kind of a spin-off off the Leo platform, or a subset of features from Leonardo, which is now available within Canva. So I think, there's a couple of ways I would imagine a designer in Canva would use Leonardo. So for instance, you want a specific new asset that you want to generate, you could literally just go ask for a generation from Phoenix. Because it's so prompt adherent, you expect it to be pretty good, pretty aligned with what you want. We have some transparency features. If you just want like a specific kind of a logo looking thing, or just the subject of the image, for instance, you could apply transparency, bring that over to Canva, and use it in your design. You could also just Canva have one of the best background removal features, remove background, which is from Kaleido and one of their other acquisitions. So you could, literally bring in the entire image into Canva, remove background, and then paste it in wherever you want. If you want to potentially condition the generation on I guess, the design that you're trying to use, well, the design that you're building in Canva, you could take a raster image of that potentially and use it as style conditioning within
Oh,
Canva.
I didn't know that. So that's one of the ways that you can actually ensure brand consistency. I've been a heavy Canva user for 6, 7 years now. I do all of my marketing for Salad on Canva, my other marketing activities, everything purely on Canva. And Magic Studio, I use Magic Studio all day long. And in fact, the background removal, when this podcast is done and then we publish this on YouTube with a beautiful thumbnail with your face, I use the Canva background removal tool at least 20 to 30 times a day. But oftentimes, jumping from one tool, Canva, to Leonardo, the brand consistency that's often not missing, but that's a user behavior, right? Like, so I haven't gone through the work of setting up, the frameworks and processes that ensure that I can just seamlessly go through, because it's important, but it's something that I can just go and I remember the brand colors, everything. I can just type it in. How do you account for the user behavior? Because now you've got these two great tools coming together, but nudging users to behave in a certain way and saying, hey, now you need to be using Canva and Leonardo together all the time. And you need to set up these sort of processes. You partner with creators. Do you have those sort of cues within the tool? Or is there a whole bunch of things all working together?
Yeah. I mean, I think Leonardo and Canva, they serve kind of slightly different purposes. So they have their own customer base, but I think like those synergies definitely exist, right? And we're building in more and more of those integrations. You know, since the acquisition, it took like 2 months for Dreamlab to pop up in Canva. So the team works fast. But in terms of direct integrations, I would imagine something probably through Dreamlab. Dreamlab being kind of, as I mentioned, Leonardo's twin cousin on Canva. That would be I guess, the easiest way to kind of generate assets and then have them pop up, I guess, use them in your designs, I suppose.
Got it. Now Leonardo generates a lot of digital assets from game assets, 3D models, 2D images. What sort of unique challenges arise when generating 3D content, for example, compared to 2D? Because 2D images, I think, has become completely mainstream. But what sort of unique challenges arise with respect to 3D models, whether it's in the generation or in inference?
3D is obviously a lot heavier in terms of the representation. So yeah, very dense pixel grids that you have to generate, well, meshes rather. But we don't actually do 3D object generations at the moment. We mainly do 3D texture generations, which is basically a 2D pixel raster, which is then mapped onto a 3D object. So it's if you want to like kind of skin one of your game characters or something like that. So you condition basically the generation with the object's texture profile, and then you You generate it in 2D and then you map it back to 3D. So we don't do the native 3D generation of the
Got
model.
it. Yeah. In terms of inference, obviously we've all known the hockey stick growth that Leonardo achieved in terms of users. Obviously, and I'm just venturing a guess here that that should have come with some interesting challenges with respect to serving inference at scale. All of a sudden, you have to serve a large pool of users, securing compute, because that's something that a lot of other startups also feel. And we've seen plenty of startups stumble at that challenge. Are there some interesting things that stand out from how Leonardo tackled that challenge?
So I have to admit, I wasn't necessarily part of that phase of Leonardo's journey. We have a great partnership with us and a lot of other cloud providers. Um, the AWS CEO gave us a shout out at just reInvent 2023. So that was a pretty special moment for us. So, so we're pretty important in terms of that strategic partnership for the cloud provider. So I think we've always gotten a pretty good deal and the earliest access to GPU resources. And yeah, other than that, obviously we try to be as efficient as possible and so on, so we can serve more users with minimal latency and so on. But yeah, I think that's probably it.
We all remember the shout out as well, because that I think came right after I met your team or something along those lines. And then that was really cool to see. I think when I saw one of your co-founders who posted about it on LinkedIn, and it doesn't get better than that, getting a shout out on one of the biggest stages in the world when it comes to the tech industry. Now, optimizations, right? Like, so generative art in real time comes with a lot of fluctuations in demand.
Mhm.
Uh, Over the years or over a period of time, do you feel like you sort of have a sense of or some sort of average of, hey, this is our baseline and this is as high or as low as we can go? Or is it just wild all over the place? And if so, how do you actually account for in terms of hardware aware strategies? Like, are there techniques like model compression, specialized hardware? How do you actually account for a demand that you're not sure?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a fantastic answer to that. Mostly because I don't work as closely to kind of our production side of things. I'm more on the research side, but I know we have like some kind of on demand kind of like scaling kind of systems to kind of handle user demand if there's like particularly high peaks and so on. But we had some pretty big brands sign up with us. So we had a partnership with Coca-Cola. They did their Christmas marketing campaign through Leonardo. And so
Oh, okay.
that drove a huge amount of traffic. And so we prepared for that. And I think, yeah, the engineering team did a lot of work to make sure that we're able to handle that traffic. And obviously now that we're serving to Dreamlab in Canva, they've got, 220 million monthly active users. So that's a lot of traffic coming our way too.
We all remember the Coca-Cola campaign. As a marketer, that was a beautiful moment and also sort of a reality check, because all of a sudden you realize that marketers either have to upskill and really get in line with these tools, but also it is something that is going to come after a lot of jobs, but also create newer roles in its place. And I remember seeing that campaign and immediately going to Canva, Leonardo, going to my set of AI tools to see, can I actually recreate a part of this? Because that's sort of the curiosity that it generated. That was a brilliant campaign, and I love that that was created completely within Leonardo.
Yeah.
Now, going back to your research side, when you're working on these newer models, what are some technical challenges that comes to maintaining diversity or accounting for different regional cultures, tastes? Because we always talk about from the end user side, hey, you should be more diverse. But from the technical implementation side, what are some of the key challenges that you face?
Yeah, that's for sure. It's an area where we're starting to actively look at more. It's a broader issue in AI at the moment. If your data is underrepresentative of certain ethnicities and so on, that's likely to seep into your model. So we're launching a PhD program actually, which we're quite excited about to do kind of these deep research in safety and bias and model efficiency and a bunch of other things. So there's a lot of things from a technical perspective. If you have some information about kind of the distribution of your data set, so for instance, there's a lot of maybe one ethnicity over the other, you can push the model to either see more of the data. Well, you can repeat the samples basically of the underrepresented data, so it sees it more times. Or there's all these kind of contrastive learning methods where you can basically push the model to basically a more median representation, if you will, of between different ethnicities and so on. But ethnicity is just one kind of axis, right? There's so many others, so you kind of have to balance across them without hampering kind of the model's flexibility and kind of representation ability.
Got it. That's interesting because at Salad, we also have a lot of image generation tools running in our space. And as end users, where it became really apparent was some of the profile picture generators tools that were out there where there was a lot of controversy around. You type in a CEO, it gave a certain, ethnicity, certain look. So it's great to know that, the tools have not just put as an afterthought, but companies like Leonardo are actively working and from within your model space as well.
No, 100%. We're really trying to embrace open source and kind of give back to the community. And that's where our roots are. And so we're pretty serious about publishing more papers and, launching this PhD program and supporting students. And we've got an internship program to help kind of nurture young professionals and so on. So I think our founders, they're very generous. I don't know what the right word is. I would say generous people. And Melanie, for instance, from Canva, she has this two-step approach for Canva, which is one is, be a successful business, and the other is do as much good to the world as possible. So I love that that's, a core part of the mission because it really it filters down to the employees and how people work together and so on. It's a more inspiring mission for to have that kind of on the agenda. And part of that is safety and bias for sure.
Yeah. And then looking from the outside as well, Canva definitely comes across as a company that is just laser focused on those two things, be successful and do good. And that's probably one of the reasons why Canva is a darling of the masses. All right. I think one final question. What do you think will be the most surprising development in AI in the next 5 years, especially around democratization, generative applications?
Yeah, for sure. Most surprising development in AI. The open source community is working hard, working overtime. And I love that because there's a lot of things that emerge that people, in the mainstream aren't thinking about. And I'm honestly looking forward to be surprised with what sort of comes. I don't really like to make predictions, but I'm quite interested. I'm quite excited about generative gaming. Yeah, so kind of real-time generative gaming. I think real-time will be a real possibility. We already have in Leonardo some pretty good real-time features. So if we can scale that into kind of world modeling type of space with video and stuff like that, I think you have something that's pretty solid at simulating the world, or at least a kind of a virtual world. So you can really do generative gaming with that. So pretty excited.
Generative gaming sounds like a game changer. And then is there an AI hot take that you have that, that probably raises some eyebrows, but something that you believe that most people might not agree with?
I think simply throwing compute at the wall is probably not the best long-term strategy. And I think a lot of companies were doing that for the longest time. I think it needs to go hand in hand. And, scaling is definitely proven to be a valid approach. But I think if we are thinking about long-term sustainability and how do you get this into the hands of the masses at a low cost, you do need to think about, what kind of paradigm shifting learning algorithms can I look at? And we've had backpropagation since the 70s or 80s, and we're pretty much still on that. I feel like I haven't seen a lot of research kind of targeting that direction. Yeah, I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but yeah, I feel like there could be some significant breakthroughs in that direction, and that could really be the key to unlocking AGI if that's, even a direction we want to go in.
I like that you added the disclaimer there, which is if that's the direction that we want to go, and that is going to be the raging debate. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I know it's, I think, midnight over there in Australia. Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on the AI Innovators Podcast by Salad Cloud.
Thanks for having me, Prashanth. Cheers.